Pretty much the entire Western world has ground to a halt in response to this pandemic, but one country has decided not to follow their lead. Sweden never closed primary schools. Restaurants and shops have stayed open. Large gatherings have been halted, and the vulnerable have been encouraged to stay home. But Sweden has never locked down. They never embraced the Chinese model of unprecedented society-wide repression. So how exactly has that worked for them, and what can we learn, if anything? Joel Hayes is a professor in the Department of Pharmaceutical Economics and Policy at the University of Southern California, the Noble USC. He joins us. And Professor, thanks so much for coming on. So what do you think the lessons, if any, for us from Sweden are?
Well, I think the lessons are pretty clear. Sweden has about the same deaths per million as the United States, and yet they haven't gone through anywhere close to the pain and suffering and lost careers, lost jobs, lost families that we've had to deal with. They're out enjoying life. They're in parks, restaurants, and theaters.
So for my entire lifetime, and my last name is Carlson, so I pay attention to this, the left has kind of lauded Sweden as a model for the rest of the world. The Swedish model was always the one held up as the best way. In the last month, I've heard more people attack Sweden maybe than ever before. Why the anger?
I think it's somewhat justified. I think Sweden is proving to the world that none of this is necessary, and so, why do we Americans have to do silly things like not go to beaches, not go to parks, not go to restaurants and cultural events, not even go to our religious ceremonies? So, and the Swedes are, they have limitations, a few, and I think under the circumstances they're relatively sensible given the mass hysteria everywhere else, but they don't engage in those things. And if you compare Sweden to Norway, which is a very similar country, right next door, 1,000-mile open border, Norway slammed their economy into reverse, and Sweden's doing much better.
How is the death rate between the two countries? Markedly different?
Well, that's kind of interesting. Okay, so Sweden has a death rate that is the same as ours. And keep in mind, we've had to go through a lot of shutdowns, and we are about the same as Sweden. Norway has a lower death rate, although we can argue whether that's statistically meaningful, but their total case rate is actually higher than Sweden. So they went through all these shutdowns, all these restrictions, all these business closures, and they still have more cases. And no one on the side of let's do social distancing can explain to me why is it that if you shut down the economy, you get more cases? And why is there a difference between deaths per case and in between two countries? That doesn't really make a lot of sense. If you're going to engage in these social controls, they should control deaths. Isn't that the whole point? We're not trying to control cases. We're trying to control bad outcomes like deaths.
Right. No, it's a very good point. But instead of paying attention to any of that, we rushed headlong into the Chinese model and ignored the Swedish model. It really should tell you a lot. And we're going to spend years trying to figure this out, but I think we're on the scent already. Professor, great to see you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Tucker.